Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. Thomas Merton said art enables us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. I'm going to read that again. Thomas Merton said art enables us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. The mind that responds to the intellectual and spiritual values that lie hidden in a poem, a painting, or a piece of music discovers a spiritual vitality that lifts it above itself, takes it out of itself, and makes itself present on a level of being that it did not know it could ever achieve. You have to go back and play that back, but that little nugget from Thomas Merton is an introduction to a really important conversation on art and art's power to open our imagination to a quality of life that sometimes we miss. I like to think of artists as guides, people who have the unique capacity and courage to travel into and go first into those interior spaces in our head, in our heart, that we all have, that we all share those landscapes, but they don't get traveled as much. Sometimes because there's a lot of hurt there, sometimes there's a lot of fear there, sometimes we just don't have time or capacity to enter into that interior life. Artists have the capacity and the courage to go into those places, and by them going first, they get to give us language. And their stories help us understand our stories. And they help us understand our life and our life together and our life together with God. And it's the tremendous gift that we're given in artists. My next guest tonight is an artist with that kind of quality of courage and capacity. Julie Clark is a singer and songwriter born in Tennessee. She currently lives in North Carolina with her husband, Casey, who happens to be here live with us tonight. Welcome, Casey. And she recently released her solo album, After the Violence, which is an exploration of how memory unfolds in the present and how redemption isn't constricted by time. The album is a reminder that nothing, not joy, not pain, confusion, celebration, none of it is wasted. It's all a part of what it means to have an abundant life. Please welcome my next guest, Julie Clark.
Hello. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you traveled all the way down from North Carolina.
Yes.
And we put this on the books months and months and months ago. And I kept spinning this tale about Tampa's winter is amazing. You'll be blown away. You wander around at night. It's like 75 degrees and just yarn about it. They came into town last night and they were like, it's freezing cold here. We almost didn't get off the plane. But I'm so glad that you came down to share the album, but really more importantly, the time. And I was serious when I said that your gift and capacity, it's both courage and capacity to enter the interior life, is something that some of us are learning. Some of us are comfortable in that space. A lot of us are not comfortable in that space. And it's something that, again, uncovering enchanted reality, God made you, formed you in your mother's womb. There's a story there. And unfortunately, we were talking last night at dinner, there's been this impulse to almost bifurcate our lives. And just like we do like pre-9/11, post-9/11, like there's a line of demarcation. Sometimes in the church we say, like, well, that was before I knew the Lord. And we almost scrub all that story back there. And it's easy to forget that God was at work in that story. And in fact, he did form you. That part of you that he made is still a part of you. And him at work in that matters. And it may matter to somebody else that is traveling a similar road. And so I can't wait to get into your story and to talk about the album. I thought the way in for the conversation might be to start with those people and places that you looked back on for this album. So let's do this. Start us at like the childhood front door.
Okay.
I don't know if it was a screen door that, some of them have hinges that don't stick and they just whack really hard. I don't know what front door you were opening, but just open your front door and walk us into the living room and introduce us to the characters in your story, childhood story.
Okay. Let's go to the back door.
Love that.
Okay.
Okay,
let's do it. We lived outside, basically, and so the back door was the closest door to the kitchen. And so a lot of, eating fun things happen in the kitchen. So one memory I have is being 4 years old, coming into the kitchen on my birthday and my dad whisking me up in his arms and taking me outside. It was our favorite place to be. Put me on his shoulders, and we walked around. And for some reason, I've never forgotten it. Just how loved I felt in that moment. And looking at, it's in June, so everything's in bloom, and you can smell that grass. I mean, I don't know if you guys like the smell of grass, but I love it. Yeah, everything in bloom, and just being on his shoulders, it was the safest place I could be. And I think about that a lot. We had every year at Christmas, all the kids in the neighborhood would put on a Christmas pageant in our house. So we had this playroom. It was actually like a den, but it was toys everywhere. And so we cleared it out, and everybody would come for this silly pageant that we would do every year. And my best friend, April, had long, beautiful blonde hair, and she always got to be Mary, and I was so jealous. I had to be the angel, and then I found out later the angel was a guy. So Gabriel, maybe he was, maybe, who knows. Anyways, I always had to be the angel, and then she moved away, and I got to be Mary. So
it all worked out. Tell me, what's your dad's name?
Tom.
Mm-hmm. Significant character in all of our lives, whether you have a powerful, deep relationship with our dads, whether we know our dads, there is a memory that we carry from our dad. Mm-hmm. And Tom, your dad, on his shoulders, out in the grass. When you told that story last night, just of your memory of your dad, you were trying to put into words like who, I was trying to tease out, who is this Tom, because there was obviously an imprint from him deep in your heart, and you said, well, he's like Jesus.
Yeah.
And you were not joking or being light about that. And this, very much so with your story, he is, in the sense that he chose you.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Say a little bit more about that and how significant that is, because it'll come up later, I think, when we think about the album.
Well, I was adopted. I was adopted as a baby. And so I grew up always believing that I was super special because my parents came and chose me, came and got me and brought me into their home. And I always thought it was a special thing, not that I had like a defect or something. And then 8th grade came around, and, we're in class and we're in science, and we're supposed to go home and look at our parents for genetic reasons, and look at our parents and say, what trait did you get from your mom and dad? And I remember going, I don't look like them at all. And I was like, all of a sudden, it was like that lie seeped in of identity. Who am I? Who do I belong to? And my mom, I remember just in passing, she's like, oh, you have blue eyes like your dad. And it just stuck with me. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm okay. My dad he's really important to me. Yeah.
Mom's name?
Connie
and Tom. And you had siblings?
Mm-hmm. I had one sister. I have one sister and 2 brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did art show up? Because your creativity, both you and Casey, your husband, wildly creative people. And did you see signals of that early on? Did your dad see signals of that and fan that flame? Or maybe where can you see it when you look back childhood and go, there was writing there was music there?
Well, probably my earliest memory is a picture I found of me and my brother. It's one of those microphones that's attached to the big box, and I'm singing and playing the guitar, like this fake guitar, and he's playing the guitar, and we're jamming out. I remember back in the 70s, there were these commercials that would come on, and it was, you can buy 100 records, what is it? Like I don't know how you do it. I never bought a record from the TV, but you could call and order these records, like 100 songs, and they would have like pieces of the songs on there, and I would get up and dance and sing. I knew this much of the song, but I don't know. It had an impact on me. And then I loved to sing all the time, and so my mom, literally, neighbors would come over, and she'd be like, "Julie, sing a song for Fran."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd be like, okay. I loved it.
This is one of the things that I love in all the conversations that we get to have is some of that looking back. It just fascinates me that here we are in our, I remember talking to Sonny Spencer, who went into fashion, worked in New York, right in the heart of New York's fashion scene. And she remembers going to sleep, dressing up and wearing boots and these things latent in our childhood, just there and undeveloped. Karen Pryor, so many of the authors, they fell asleep with books. And they remember, dogging the ears of the books and the pages of the books. And I can imagine you singing, and I did the same thing, although I think I was in the 80s when I started ordering they send you the things in the mail and you can sign up to get the free tapes and all that. And then your credit score goes terribly wrong because you don't know how to open mail or you don't open mail. And I think BMG or whoever it is still is after me for all of that. But the music was good. Yeah. And it followed you and
music
developed.
Was good.
Who were the influences musically that you remember?
Donnie Marie Osmond.
Okay.
You probably don't know who they are. Do you know? Yes.
There's some people who know.
Okay. So I would literally stick my face in the record as it was turning. And that's how I learned how to harmonize. Because you could feel the vibration. You could feel the vibration somehow. And I would be singing these songs with them. And I felt like I was actually singing the songs with them. And then, Sean Cassidy. Let's see. Billy Joel.
Yeah.
Anyone that played piano and sang. Barry Manilow.
Yeah.
Okay. John Denver, is my favorite.
I think I'm in heaven. Yeah.
I love that guy.
Yes.
James Taylor.
Yeah.
And then, as I got a little bit older, music changed. It wasn't as folky.
Yeah.
It got more poppy and rock.
Yep.
I'm trying to give you an example. My first concert I ever went to was Rick Springfield. And this band named Till Tuesday opened up for them. And I came home from that concert and I smelled this weird smell the whole time in the concert. And I remember coming home and my dad was like sniffing me. He was like, I'm in 7th grade. And he's like, what is that smell on you? I guess it was marijuana. I had no idea. I didn't know what marijuana smelled like, but
Rick Springfield did, yeah.
But anyways, I guess there was a lot of that going on. It was a church thing, so we weren't doing that.
It's so crazy the influences that shape us musically, and you'll hear it. I mean, Julie's album, by the way, I think we're going to give one away tonight. You pressed a vinyl, and I didn't understand this, but if you, I guess, look at a vinyl album and you look at it through a microscope, it's actually like if you were to look at an audio file, the up and down squiggly line of an audio file, that is actually carved into the vinyl. And so you're literally, when you're looking at an album, you're looking at the audio file, and that's what's producing that sound. Just incredible that, first of all, that's the technology that you could put your face near that record and feel those vibrations. And for all of us who grew up in that era, I used to dig through my dad's records, Three Dog Night, John Denver, the Beach Boys, all Steppenwolf, all the things, right, that were in there. And those records were just beautiful. And that music shapes you.
Yes.
And then it starts to have a life of its own. I think my first, I was smuggling Public Enemy tapes. I went through that phase. And I think when I look back, I go, I was a champion for the underdog. I've always been a catalyst for the underdog. And I think that's the energy they had. My first concert, though, I took my mom to a Kenny G concert. Make sense of that. By day, I'm listening to Public Enemy and hiding those tapes. And by night, I'm taking my mom to a Kenny G concert. Crazy.
Yeah.
You took a turn. Was faith a part of your writing and your music as you kind of drew from all of those influences? Were you also was your art informed by faith along the way, or did the two of those kind of commingle later?
Later, but I grew up Catholic, and I joined the folk group at our church, and so for the 9 a.m. service on Sundays, the young kids, literally, we were in high school, we did all the music for the Mass, and so that's where I began to get that John Denver folky, thing out and playing in front of, the congregation or whatever. And it was super fun. And then I don't know, I don't know, I was Catholic. And so most of my friends, weren't. And so like in school, so I would go to like Bible studies with them and they would be singing these songs that I didn't know, I didn't know what they were. And so I felt left out. Like everybody knew the words. And I was like, I've never heard of this before. They'd never heard of the songs that we were singing in our Catholic church.
Yeah.
But looking back now, I can see like, wow, the songs, of the Mass, incredible. Beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So beautiful and, timeless.
And I'm sure that informed that liturgical way. There's so much depth, so much richness that doesn't always translate over. You had John Denver liturgy and then began to write more contemplative worship songs, adoration, in the evangelical space, writing worship songs. How did you make the turn to say, I want to write worship?
Oh, well, I got saved. I met Jesus. And I did not know people wrote songs about Jesus. I knew who Amy Grant was and Michael W. Smith, and I knew they were doing something with God. But when I met Jesus, I couldn't believe that I could write songs about, to Jesus.
To him.
So it was more of not so vertical worship as it was this personal, like I'm writing one-on-one to you, Jesus. And that's how it started. And then, my very first, non-denominational service, I went and they were playing like folk music, like the Chris Tomlin and stuff, all of that was like acoustic. We had bongos, I think, and a bass and a guitar. And I was like, oh, this is like Dave Matthews. And I was just so enamored with it. And I was like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And then they're singing and these songs, like, they were so impactful to me. I was like, I believe you. When you're, these words I believe, I understand them as well. So sometimes, growing up in Mass, the songs that we would sing, one was, the Lord hears the cry of the poor, blessed be the Lord. I couldn't unpack that as a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old. Oh, the poor. Okay, God hears the cry of the poor. What do I do with that? I'll just sing this song and, but it didn't have any effect on me. I think it did later, but not at that point. But when I went into the service and they were singing these songs, great, how great is our God, and I can't remember any of them right now. Some step by step. I mean, there was just amazing. Rich Mullins. I mean, what in the world? That was like, oh my gosh, I believe that you guys know Jesus and you're singing, So it had a huge impact to me, and so that's what I wanted to do. And I joined the worship team at church and just started writing songs that no one else heard.
Yeah, new songs.
I took the Psalms, started there, and I would just sing them.
This is what I think is so beautiful and so important, and so the movement of art, and something that we can all contribute back to, is the idea that writing and music it's not static, it's dynamic. And the way that you describe the high liturgy of the Catholic Church and these incredible words that have been sung, they've been chanted, they've been handed down from generation to generation, we can say yes to that, and we can say yes to the beauty and the intimacy, the personal.
Both are very important and necessary.
Both are good. If you're listening to the podcast, whether you're live in the room or you are listening in Seattle or San Diego, this is part of the work that we need to do, to understand that God made us, formed us in our mother's womb, gave us language, gave us capacity in our senses to understand and to encounter God and each other and the world, and then to share those experiences. We talk about up and in and out, and all of that is beautiful. And what I love about you is you're drawing from the depth of all of that high liturgical art. And you're also able to bring people really intimately into a story. And we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. I want to talk about the album. I want to talk about the writing, because this this solo project that you just released, After the Violence, is not worship in the traditional sense that we would think about worship music. It's an honest look back at where God was in your story and what was happening in your life and in these moments, and was he there and how was he there in a surprising way. And it's a big departure. I want to get into that. What made you say yes to that? Why did you take a turn from where you had been writing and how you had been writing? So I want to talk about the album. I want to talk about After the Violence. And one of the songs on the track is What Dad Saw.
Yes.
And we have a t-shirt, this beautiful art from the album. And so tell us, just to get the conversation about the album going, what's happening? Why is the artwork what the artwork is?
Okay.
And this is What Dad Saw.
Yeah. So this is me as 6 years old jumping off the high dive at my neighborhood pool. And I was super scared to go off this. I mean, it was really high for a little kid, 12 feet or something. And once I did it once, I got braver and braver. But, when you're a kid, you don't have that fear. It's not in you yet. And I used to do flips and dives off the high dive. And I just remember my mom saying, "You're going to hurt yourself. You need to stop doing that." And, after a while, that stuff starts to sink in and you begin to believe, maybe I should be afraid of these things. And it's not her fault. It's like, I'm a mom too. I would say the same thing. But I remember that time being 6 years old, free of fear. And so, that's part of the song.
Part of the song.
Yeah.
The album is After the Violence.
Yeah.
Talk to us about before we get into the title of the album. This is a strong shift from what you had been writing, the music that you had been producing. This has its own sound. It has its own content and writing and flavor. What was the change, and why was this album so important to follow that trail and go in a little bit of a different direction?
Okay. Well, my dad died like 2.5 years ago. And when he died, the grief just kind of overwhelms you. And you're like, okay, God feels different in the moment. So how can I process this? Because he was, everything I described, he was just precious to me. So when he died, I began to process and figure out. And I didn't want God to be the subject of my life anymore. I wanted to think about him, and I wanted to think about, I just didn't know where I stood with the Lord. And so instead, I talked to the Lord about it, and I was like, I cannot sing these songs at church anymore. I can't do it. It hurts too much. You are good. You are good. It was very difficult to sing those things. And so I could sing memories, though. I could think about my memories with my dad. I've always had this gift of being able to remember from very early on. And, there are certain memories in your life that you just keep going back to. And when I started thinking about how to process this, I thought, what do I know? I know music and I know memories. And at that point, it was like, I don't know a lot about God, is what I felt at that point. But I did know the love of a father. I knew a surrender of a mother because of my mother who, gave me up for adoption. And I knew that God would make good of those things. So,
before I follow up to that, thank you for just giving language. Again, that's what I think artists, they travel, you go first into these spaces and lament. There's space in our scriptures for lament, for language and groaning and conversation with God, where we talk about orientation, disorientation, new orientation. All is well. And I know God in that space.
Yeah.
And we can sing these songs. And then we go through seasons of disorientation where we say, I don't know where you are, God. I don't know where I am. And for everybody who's listening, this is the arc. This is the path that we find in Scripture. And so you don't have to feel like you are, like there's something wrong with you or your faith or the quality of your relationship with God. If you open the Scriptures, these are the trails and the wildernesses and the places that God's people have found themselves. And there's language there in Scripture, and you've given that lament language and given voice to what does it mean to have a conversation, which I love that you didn't back away from or shrink back. You leaned in to your relationship with God, but in a very real and honest way. And you also ask those specific questions. I know what it is for a mom to surrender. I know there's that in my story.
Yeah.
I know my dad's shoulders.
Yeah,
I know grief
right.
now that I didn't know before. As you started to go back, you knew you wanted to, but as you started that process, was there a point where you said, I need to stop for a while and take this in bites? Or did you just open yourself up to all of it at the same time?
Well, when I started talking to a producer, it was like, okay, we're going to do this. And so it was like, I didn't even have to, I didn't really have time to think about it anymore. I had made a decision. I'm going to make an album and it's going to be about memories. And, I don't know if we're going to mention this now, so I'll mention it. But when I met the Lord, I was 26. My favorite memories of my dad was when I was little. I have just the best memories of my dad. And so it was like, what is that verse that talks about, I wrote it down. If anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old is past, the new has come. So when I got saved, it was like I left all of that old life behind me. And it was, I'm born again, I'm new, let's go. But when my dad died, it was all of these amazing memories with him. So when I went back there, it was like, God, you've been with me this entire time. So I got to see the hand of the Lord in all of those places. Even before I, knew Jesus, he was there. It's just a beautiful thing to be able to go back to our entire story. Like we've so focused on what was the, what was the date of when you got saved and when you met the Lord. And that is important, but also what is important is to go back and go, oh, there's your fingerprint, Lord. Oh, there's your fingerprint. And it's not all like bad. It's all, your entire story is good. The Lord is with us through the entire thing, whether we acknowledge him or not. And it was really important for me to go back and see him in those places because it helped me know who God was in my grief. It helped me to see him as he's always been a comfort. Not just when I acknowledged and wanted to write songs about him, but always. And he gave me this dad, like he arranged my entire life, the precious gift my mother gave, me to live. He was there for that. He was there when I was taken from her, when she left the hospital without me. He was there comforting me, comforting her. And I think it's so important to talk about those things, because they don't have a happy ending. There's not a bow tied around. And with worship, it was, how great is our God? God is good. And all of the things are so true, and I believe them with all my heart. But I wanted to talk about those things that don't have a happy ending, that aren't settled. There's stuff, it's just life is hard. And there's trouble.
Yeah. And it's to have art give language and voice to that. We talked about it as friendship. Sometimes the artist is that friend who's traveling with you when you're in that space, and it's very hard for other people to relate or enter that space because they're just not there. And yet an artist who's traveled that space can come sit next to you, and you all of a sudden feel resonance and go, oh, that pain, that hurt.
Yeah.
There's something incarnational about that art can do in a really beautiful way to meet us there.
Yeah.
What surprised you when you went back and you looked at where God was present in your story? How did what did you learn of God as you went back and you went, wow, he was here, and I see him here, and I see his way differently there?
Yeah. I think that one of the reasons I think God is so wonderful is that he sits with us. He doesn't push us. I remember I would always find church parking lots when I was like 17, 18, 19, 20. And I would go to these church parking lots and I would scream in my car. I would cry. I would be like, why, God, why? I'm just screaming, hoping that some miracle would happen, and whatever was going on in my life, it would get resolved like that. And it never did, but it did, right? But so I was able to go back and look at those places, and I got this vision of literally God. My dad, before he would go to work, he would give me a hug, and he always smelled like leather and this soap, and I picture myself in God's overcoat, just like stuck right in here, and it's dark in there, but gosh, that's where I am. That's where I'm being held. So I could see that going back.
Yeah, you even encounter texts like that, like in the shadow of your wing, or hidden in like that. And it makes sense intellectually. But when you're afraid, when your heart is broken, when you only have tears, and you can say, no, I have nowhere else to go, I'm hiding.
Yeah. And we read that, hiding in the shadow of your wing. What does that look like? Well, it looks like my dad's overcoat.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Can we talk about, you mentioned the relationship you had just thinking about your mom. One of the songs, Veins of My Mother.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that, because we're gonna sing that. That's one of the ones that we're gonna do for everybody who's live in the room. She's gonna sing the song Veins of My Mother, which I think it's one of the one. There's probably 3 or 4 that just pressed on us as we listened. But and by the way, while you're thinking about that, this is the vinyl pressing. So somebody tonight, does anybody have a record player? Okay, there's some record people. All right. One of you is going to go home with this. These are super rare. This is the pressing that the production company gives you.
It's not going to look like this.
Julie brought this down to give to somebody in the room. And you just think about that. Veins of My Mother. Everything that you've heard of Tom and Connie in this life and this story, and the grief and the hope and the tears and the hiding poured out, and that's art. And you can put that on, and that voice is going to come alive. And so somebody's going to go with this. One of these tracks is Veins of My Mother.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Okay. Well, I love love, and I had a lot of, these soul, like in high school. I love him, Mom. Like, he's my soulmate, blah, blah, blah. And there was, this part of me, and I've always thought of it because I was adopted, that there was just this thing. I have a really hard time of letting things go and people. And so Veins of My Mother is basically my way of trying to hang on to, a love, the way that I was before I knew the Lord, really, like relationships, and, how Oh, they were.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a hard time letting go. I did not like people to leave me. And I had conversations to my mother in my head quite often. And I remember going in a grocery store with my mom and seeing a woman in the aisle and going, could she be my mom?
Wow.
And it wasn't that wasn't, I loved my mom, but it's just this piece that is empty. There's this empty part of my story, and I don't know who she is. And I don't know. I think it's really affected me in my life. It's one of those things where it doesn't have a happy ending.
Yeah.
It's just sad, but sweet too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the sweetness part of that, when you mentioned like she made a choice.
Yes.
I mean, this is National Dignity of Life Month. We just celebrated a Sunday where we marked as a country, as a culture, like we're going to say yes, even when it's hard, even when it's broken, even when we don't know what to do with life. There's a dignity to that life. There's a beauty to that life. And your mom, you don't know your biological mom, but there were moments probably of fear and terror and question and doubt.
Absolutely.
And all those things. And as we talk about commingled, there's a good, there's a broken, there's a future. And in that moment, she said yes to your life.
Yes.
In the way maybe that she could.
Absolutely.
At that moment.
So
and
pure.
that one moment to honor the dignity of your life, and even if the best she could do was say there's a holiness to that life, that yes led to the story that now is your children and it just goes on and on and on. And it's the power, if you're listening tonight, like another thing that we can recover is just the holiness and the dignity of life, no matter how complicated and fragile and broken.
Yeah.
But what comes, there's a long arc to that story. And your yes in this moment, we have no idea what God is doing, what the significance of that life and beauty is going to be.
It's precious.
Thank you for opening up the way that artists do. Sometimes doing that on an album is easier maybe in some ways than doing it live in a room where you can see somebody's face and say, this is my story. This is my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here thinking about grief. 2 years is not a long time. And so that takes a lot of courage to come down to a new city and just talk to us about grief alone. Before we go to hear some of the music, what have you learned about that grieving process? Like today, just I'm thinking about people listening and we're going, okay, yes, to the dignity of life, and yes, to this pain of almost the violence of death, the loss part. What have you learned about grieving?
I heard someone say grief is unexpressed love. And I believe that. How many times can you say I love you? There's not enough times. I have known a great love. And so the grief is something that I carry, gladly in one sense because it came through love. Grief is funny. It doesn't have you can't hold it in your hand. It's something that you don't know when it's going to hit you. So it's just always with you. But there's a hope in it as well. I think the first year was blackness. You're just trying to survive. I remember I filled my whole house with plants. And before he died, my whole life, I never had a plant. I kill things. I kill plants. And after he passed away, he was a gardener. He loved roses. He had hundreds of roses. I mean, he put roses in the middle of our front yard. Like, it didn't make sense. They were dumb looking, but there they were in the middle of the yard. It's like, do I go around this? What do I do? So always roses, always roses. We always had a garden, always vegetables and stuff. And it's just, I could not keep anything alive. And after he passed, it was like, I didn't do it and go, I'm going to have plants and keep them alive. It was just, it just fell into my lap. I'm going to have plants. And I got more and more and more and more plants. And then COVID hit and everyone got plants. It's like, I have to keep something alive. I have to do something. I have to, So yeah, my whole house was full of plants and light. And it was a year after that, I guess, year and a half is when I started. No, year is when I had the courage to write this. Yeah. And the songs, I didn't know what they were going to say. I just knew that it was in me and it was going to come out and it was going to mark me.
Yeah. We feel it. You'll feel it in a second in the room. The album After the Violence, you can listen to it on Spotify. You can order it. Where can people find, if they want to follow the story and the unfolding of the story as it goes, where's the best place to stay in touch or to reach out and find?
Well, Instagram is always a friend. That's really where I'm posting everything. Yeah. Spotify, anywhere you listen to music is there.
Yeah.
So I'll give you my handle.
Yeah, there you go.
After a while, if you want.
We'll put it up.
Okay, we'll put it up.
We'll do all the things that they all know how to do that I don't know how to do. But what I do know how to do is when I hear something that presses on our heart, and it's almost like if you look at your fingerprints right now, the grooves that, in those audio files, it's written from your heart. You allow us to touch the heart of your dad, to touch the heart of a mom, surrendering. All of that comes out, and Julie's art is beautiful. Thank you for giving up the time. Thank you for the vulnerability and courage to be an artist, to put something like this that's so personal out there and allow us to pull a chair up next to you and for you to pull a chair up next to us in that moment when we don't have our own words. And that is a beautiful gift. So Julie Clark, thank you so much for the time and for the album.
Thanks.